That Was Yesterday podcast is brought to you by Define Mind and Body Wellness, my wellness center here in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where we specialize in holistic services to help shortcut the process so that you can see results fast, but learn to do it in a habitual way. So many of the topics we talk about are part of the program that our clients receive, except they get much more in-depth detail. Also, my workbook of the 10-week program to lose and never look back, which is only available to our patients at Define. If you are interested in holistic body fat spot reduction, or our pod to increase your metabolism, or our cold plunge, or our sauna, which is the best sauna in the world, and that I promise you, I know that sounds biased, but you'll see for yourself. Please go to definewellnesscenter.com. You will be prompted to put your information in and make sure to mention podcast when you do, as you will be eligible for a bigger discount on our introductory services because you are a listener. Appreciate you. Have a great day and enjoy today's podcast. What's up, and welcome back to another episode of the That Was Yesterday podcast. I am your host, Joe Carabasi. And today we're talking about something near and dear to my heart. This is a topic that I have had an extensive journey dating back to a young, insecure little boy who was bullied, who had a speech impediment as a result, because I just was very self-conscious talking, quite honestly, overthinking everything I said. And there was a story that sort of manifested from there and took its own life of its own. And so much of my journey into coaching has been, a lot of it has been stuff that I've discovered in my own sort of process, and that I've been able to then transfer over to hundreds, if not thousands, of patients that I've had the opportunity to work intimately with coaching over the last 20 years. And so it's something that I really feel like we should talk about in school. You know, a lot of schools, unfortunately, do not address emotional and mental intelligence. I mean, they talk about academic and intellectual intelligence, but understanding oneself and being able to separate yourself from your feelings, understand what those feelings mean, and exploring those feelings, unfortunately, isn't something that is talked about. And therefore, so many of us are sort of stuck thinking we are our feelings and we are the labels that are pressed upon us, and our insecurities tend to project our reality. And so today, I hope we shine some light on all of that. And if this is something that resonates with you, and if you're someone who's like, I understand that conceptually, but for whatever reason, I have a hard time applying it to my life, know this: it's not because you lack the ability to. It's certainly not because of any sort of incompetency or and there's nothing wrong with you. That's not the reason as to why you may or may not be able to implement these things. And so if you still find yourself struggling, it's likely there's something in your subconscious that is blocked. And that is where hypnosis comes in, to help reset, release, and rewire your subconscious to adapt that to the types of behaviors that you want to start to adapt, so that you can start feeling as good about yourself as you deserve to. And so if that is something that interests you, go to neverlookbackweightloss.com. I have an upcoming hypnosis event, and I also have ongoing hypnosis programs, both group and one-on-one immersive coaching integration with the hypnosis. Enjoy today's show. Insecurities, fear of failure, perfectionism, these things run rampant through our society today. Unfortunately, trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. I separate that from genetics, because I think a problem we live in today's world is that things get blamed on genetics quite often. And it's not even so much because people make that excuse as much as it's about public figures, people who we would expect, institutions that we would think would tell us the honest truth and things that we should know, sometimes can misguide us. And an example of this is something that I'm still hot and heavy about. Last January, I believe it was, not this past year, the year before that, there was a doctor who appeared on CNN, 60 Minutes, I think it was, and she was quoted as saying obesity was a brain disease. And some things we should know about this doctor: she's a doctor, very smart woman. However, She did not declare this in that interview, which she should have done from an ethical and moral standpoint, and CNN should have also at least announced this. If we're going to go on the national airways and allow that message to go out that obesity is a brain disease, we should at least give context to the person who is sharing that information. And this particular doctor, if you look closely, and this information is all available online, is a consultant for pharmaceutical companies, specifically the pharmaceutical companies that sell weight loss drugs. So if obesity is a brain disease, her sort of recommendation was, well, it's a brain disease, so therefore you have to take some sort of medication, override it, or else nothing's going to work, is basically what she had said. That really bothers me. One, because it's not true. Obesity is not a brain disease. Obesity is more environmental and behavioral than anything else. That is not to say that individuals do not grow or who are not born with slower metabolisms. That is 100% a fact. People are born with slower metabolisms. There's no question of that. However, to say that people are born obese is just not accurate. Yeah, some big babies are bigger than others, but I mean, how many babies do you know who are 10 pounds who turn out to be smaller people, right? Obese, no one's born obese. Those are habits, those are traits, those are learned behaviors that we learn over time, and then made worse by people in our lives who might put us down at an early age, who might label you as fat or as overweight or as unathletic. And then if that is what you're getting told, you start to believe that about yourself, and that manifests into who you might become as an adult. Look, the statistics are pretty evident. If you have an adult family, parents who are overweight, kids are more likely to be overweight. If you're overweight as a kid, you're going to be more likely to be overweight as an adult. And so it's not a brain disease. It's behavioral, it's environmental, and it could also be reversed. And your metabolism, although it might be slower, it could also be faster. Metabolism is something that is not stuck. I work primarily with women in and around menopause. Women in and around menopause have a significant disadvantage from a metabolic standpoint because they have no choice. They have to go through that process. Even if you get a hysterectomy, there's still going to be a drop off in metabolism, which makes losing very, very hard. But is not impossible. And again, we've helped hundreds, if not thousands of women increase their metabolism during menopause. So again, it's nothing that you're stuck with, right? But this stuff transcends beyond just weight. For me, my story, so to speak, isn't about weight as much as it is about insecurities, which led into perfectionism. And so I want to share that quickly, at least parts of it, because I feel as though the context is really important. We live in today's world where so many of us do struggle with these types of things. And unfortunately, it's made worse by social media. When we look online and we see people who look like they have it all together. They look like they have the perfect family. They look like they have the perfect body. They look like they are so successful. And then naturally, our insecurities project out. And we either form a judgment about them, but more than anything, we are forming a judgment about ourselves based on what we perceive them to be and compare that to who we are. And that is very problematic. Social media has done a lot of good things, but it also has really pushed us back and especially perpetuated the issue of generational traumas. And what I mean by generational traumas is that if you have a family, say an immigrant family, like my family at one point were immigrants from Greece, there was a certain way of life that they had when they came to this country, a very hardened way of life. And oftentimes when we talk about this stuff, it's very important that we separate blaming and judging, because our family, for the most part, although not true for everybody, but for the most part, a lot of families, a lot of generational trauma doesn't get passed down because our grandparents and our parents are bad people. It just gets passed down because they did the best they could with what they knew, and that formed how we maybe perceived ourselves in the world. And if that's the label that you have on yourself and who you are, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it just keeps going and going and going until you draw a line in the sand, say no more. And so hopefully this sheds some light on perfectionism, insecurities, fear of failure, if you struggle with any of that. Because it's very important for you to understand you are not your feelings. You are not your emotions. You are not someone who has to live the life or have to experience day to day those certain feelings that you may have right now, even if you've had them your entire life. And I'm a testament to that. And I could share, again, a little bit about my own story here. But this isn't just my own story. This is stuff that I've helped a lot of people with and through. And again, one more thing on social media. Our brains have not evolved. We still have an animal part of our brain, which gives us the alert systems that have kept us as humans alive all these thousands of years. Anxiety, to be alert of what could happen. Fear, to make sure that you're not doing something that's going to put you in harm's way, right? And at one point, through human civilization and even before civilization, when there was more tribal, when the world was not civilized and was just tribes, those things kept us alive. Yet those same alert systems are the same we have today. Our brain has not developed to be able to handle the pressure of social media. And so it worsens all of these insecurities, and it will continue to worsen your insecurities unless you do something about it. And so often I know there's always a journey, right? I'm sure if these are things that you struggle with, they're not because you want to. And I'm sure you probably read self-development books, you've tried programs before, and things maybe haven't worked. Maybe you've done therapy. I can't tell you how many patients I've worked with, clients I've worked with, who have done years and years of therapy, and yet still struggle with the same issue. And that's not to say therapy is bad at all. But I do think sometimes what can happen in therapy is the conscious mind can filter, it can distract, it can numb from what's really going on, sometimes subconsciously without even knowing, because ultimately insecurities put us in a very vulnerable state. And if you learned at an early age that you have to protect that vulnerable state in order to survive, which we have done as children, then it's hard to break through and see that, which is why hypnosis has been so powerful. So many of my clients, because it's bypassing the critical factor of the conscious mind so that your conscious mind is at rest, so we can work directly with your subconscious to find out the truth, to heal whatever internal micro or macro traumas exist, so that you can really start to create lasting behavioral change. For me, I grew up bullied, and it affected me to a point where I started to believe the things I was being called: stupid, retarded, that sort of thing. And you don't know any better, right? At that early age, you kind of just form that judgment automatically. That translated into standardized tests in elementary school, just second guessing every single answer, not be able to finish the tests, which then put me in reading classes, which then, when you're in a reading class as a young kid in elementary school, you're selected out of the big class to go into a small room to move at a slower pace. Well, that can perpetuate your insecurities. You know how kids are. They see you leaving the class, they make comments, maybe to you or behind your back. And then, there start to be shame and guilt and perhaps hopelessness. If especially, if you're trying really hard and you feel like you're not getting anywhere, you might start to believe the things that you were called. And that was my case. And it really came to a point where, what happens is when you have these insecurities, you don't know what to do with them, you compensate in different ways. So for some people, food is safety. So if they don't feel good about themselves, they know that for a short, limited time, they can turn to food, have full control over it, and feel good immediately from eating. And other times, as it was for me as a young boy, I acted out. And I was angry. And I didn't bully other kids, but when you're angry, you do stupid things, especially as a young boy. But a lot of that changed for me. I had a teacher, Mrs. Case, God bless her. I don't know if she's still around, but I had handed in a paper, in English class, 6th grade. And I got a C, but she came to me and said, "Hey, this is really good. If you meet with me after school, I'll go over what you can improve. Then you can turn it back in and I'll grade it again." So I did. I got an A. And this might sound crazy to you, but when I got that A, it was like a new world. Like, I didn't know that was possible for me. Again, the thought process in my head was I was stupid. I was retarded, right? I hate that word. Trust me, I do. But we got to be real here. That's what I was called. I didn't think I was necessarily that, but that runs through your head. However, when she gave me that opportunity, I realized, wait a second. So it's not that I can't do it. I just got to put in more work. And so what happens when you have insecurities, we compensate, right? But we also seek validation. And in this way, at an early age, I found validation through starting to get honors. Miraculously, I literally went from like a C student to an honor student, to then a high honor student, to then Dean's List. And that need for external validation transferred into, as a young single man, hooking up with a lot of different women when I was, younger and single and all that. It also turned into seeking accomplishment through business and various other things. And what I found much through my 20s was no matter how much accomplishment I had, successful businesses, helping a lot of people, being on TV, I worked with some big brands, Men's Health, Beachbody, I was still empty because I was seeking external validation. I was seeking approval outside of myself. And I had a mentor early on, Doug Rice, amazing guy. He was actually a friend. One of my best friend, Kim, her father. He really, at an early age, he agreed to meet with me because I was just fascinated by success, and he is very successful. And one of the things he said to me was he got me introduced to self-development, and that helped me. Right, at an early age, you give me a school book to read, I couldn't read it, but you give me like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Modern Day Bodybuilding, which is like a 700-page book, I read it. Any self-development book I could get my hands on that I could comprehend, I read it, which was confusing when I got into like my mid-20s, and I found myself unhappy no matter what I've done. I was still unhappy. And again, it was because I was seeking validation. And that all hit a boiling point. It was one, so I was 29 at this point, and I got accepted into this nationwide search for Beachbody's next search for their next super trainer. So like, you think super trainer, you think like Autumn Calabrese, Tony Horton. These are super trainers. And so for me, I thought, wow, if I could be a fitness celebrity, like that would make me feel good. That would be what I wanted to do and all of that. So I went on this reality show. They put us in this $1 million mansion for 6 weeks. On top of LA, like we had this incredible house that we got to live in. We did all these various challenges. In fact, the show was televised on like a really unknown network, so not many people saw it. It's still on Beachbody On Demand, which, by the way, ironically, I created 2 workouts that are still on Beachbody On Demand. Guess what they were called? D-Fine, which is also the name of my wellness center that I created years later. So it's funny how things work. But either way, we went through this 6-week process, and at the end of it, there was sort of a competition where there was voting, we had to present, and they narrowed it down to top 3 finalists. I was a top 3 finalist. And from that point on, so this was like in the spring of whenever this was, maybe 2016, 17, I think it was 2016, but nonetheless. And they were going to announce the winner in fall that year. So for like 6 months, I was doing what I thought I had to do so that I can get people's approval so that I could win that show. And I'll never forget, I was in my friend's place in LA at the time. I was spending a lot of time out there. And I got a call from Carl Deichler, the CEO of Beachbody. And he said it very bluntly, "Joe, you didn't win." And I felt as though my world just came crashing down. I was like, I put myself out there and I was seeking out, people to vote for me and to like me and to do all of these things. And what I ended up finding out through people who were behind the scenes in that process was that whole 6-month process was actually not even a process. It was just a timeline that Beachbody wanted to wait in order to announce, because it worked for what they were trying to do with business. But they already knew who they wanted. They were looking for a very specific type of person, of trainer, female, and they chose Megan Davies, who's amazing, and she's a badass. Like, there's nothing on her. She deserves that. But my point is that it made me realize that, like, I had put my self-worth in the hands, basically, of a CEO and of his committee who was looking for something. And I vowed to myself I would never allow that to happen again. And so that's where the process for me of seeking external validation really started to shift. And as the universe has it, whenever you're seeking answers, as long as you're open, answers will fall on your path. And for me, they did. I started to learn more and more about the psyche. I just became obsessed with it. I started to study like Carl Jung. I started to study Michael Singer. So many influences from the past that really helped me understand how our subconscious works. And it really helped me heal and go over a lot of the traumas from being bullied as a boy and how that played out into my adult life and how it affected how I felt no matter what I did. And that led me to voice dialogue, which I became a facilitator of, where voice dialogue is basically, I've talked about this in other podcast episodes. So if this is your first one you're listening to, I encourage you to go back and check those out because it's really fascinating. It really helps you understand your feelings, or at least help me. And that really changed the game for me. And then ever since, yeah, I've had a lot of ups and downs without question. But what I found was I had to develop internal validation. You can call it internal validation. You can call it self-love. A lot of people call it confidence. But confidence is like a broader word we use for self-love. And that was something I lacked up until that point. And so this was something that really changed my life because it helped me understand my feelings that I had and what to do with those. And so fast forward years later, so things I started, I had a better grip on my psyche, and I didn't seek out the external validation anymore. And then I sold my last gym in 21. We had moved up to Connecticut, and so for 11 years of my adult life, I had multiple gyms. I had hundreds of clients at any given time. I had a team that relied on me. And and this is coming off of COVID, and COVID really hurt the gym industry. So that was a struggle for a number of months prior. So I had waited. I had loathed I could not wait until I could sell my gyms and move on, until I actually did. And I realized I lost my identity. Who was I? I didn't even know who I was. I was a guy who owned gyms. That's what I thought anyway. And of course, I was much more than that. But that's who I believed myself to be. Which, side note here, it's really, really interesting when you look back at your life, how we just kind of get sucked in and absorbed into what we're doing, and then we just keep going. It is the proverbial hamster wheel. And until you step off of that hamster wheel, it's going to keep spinning around. And you're going to see more and more of the same, good or bad. And what happens is, if you still have leftover trauma, well, events that happen can spiral you, right? They can be setting events where, like for me, it was I sold my gym. We just bought this house in Connecticut. We just moved up here. We had a young baby. So there was a pressure of how am I going to provide? What am I going to do? Along with, who am I? And, it's funny. I had been obsessed with bodybuilding. I loved it. Like I said, it was one of the first books I read, and then I read everything I could get my hands on when it came to bodybuilding, yet I never considered stepping on stage, which I would project out and say things like, oh, that's stupid, I don't need to do that, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, that was just fear. But there was something inside me. There was something that was like, hey, this might be for you right now. And it really made no sense. Like, it made no sense to get into bodybuilding at that time, because bodybuilding is a very time, it takes a lot. It is like almost like a full-time job you do not get paid for. In fact, you actually just spend a lot of money and a lot of time on. You got to meal prep. You got to buy a lot of food. You've got to, train. You got to also, on top of your training, you got to do cardio. You got to do posing. There's just so many elements to it, right? So it really made no sense, which is an important thing for you to understand, is sometimes things don't make sense. We can't understand the signs that we are receiving. So you just got to follow your intuition and let that path open up as you move forward. And for me, it did. So I went to this bodybuilding show locally, and I'll never forget it. I was watching the competitors on stage, and I had this anxiety kick in. Like, my heart was beating. I couldn't even really talk. Just watching them gave me anxiety of like, gosh, I couldn't imagine being on stage, and basically like a string of clothing, completely exposed, with other people judging how I did. And again, I can't say that I had the foresight to know what it was going to do for me, but I just felt like it was the right thing. And so I did, signed up for the show, and went through this process. And through that process of the workouts and the meal prep, and I got coaching, because I knew I needed somebody else to take care of that part, because I had to figure out, I couldn't spend more time on figuring out how to do all of that and earning. So that coaching element, which is what a good coach should do, is remove the difficulty so that you can focus on the things you need to do, which is what I do for my patients, my clients who come to me for that sort of thing. Whether it's, I don't do bodybuilding coaching, but at this point in the game, hypnosis and integration coaching, performance coaching, and all the other stuff, all the stuff that we're talking about here, insecurities, perfectionism, fear of failure. And the process for me wasn't about transforming my body. Bodybuilding was a vehicle for internal transformation for me. So I knew that I was going to step on stage. So that gave me a window of time where, I had to get my body in shape. I knew I was going to do that. I knew I was just going to follow the plan and do what I had to do. But through that process, what I realized, and especially having gone through that Beachbody experience, was I had to look inside and look at what was the fear of being on stage and being completely vulnerable. And again, it's really metaphoric than it is anything else. It wasn't about necessarily like, oh, his lats are really good or his quads are a little small. It wasn't about that. It was just about putting yourself in a position to be up there and to be on stage, but also let go of the outcome. And no matter what the outcome was, recognize that it wasn't about that. It was about putting yourself in a position, working hard, recognizing your hard work, appreciating your hard work. And that was an absolute game changer for me. And that helped me level up my coaching with all of my clients. And so really what it helped me do is sort of focus on the process and let go of the outcome. Now, I'm sure you've heard that before, right? I mean, I know I had heard that so often, and cliches oftentimes are real. They're I don't know why we put them down, but they're cliches because they fit archetypes, and we all fall in an archetype. No matter how different and unique we are, humans are very complex, but we're all very similar. And so that was something that was really a game changer for me. And so through that, it helped me learn a lot about self-love and self-worth. And one other changing moment for me, and this has kind of happened right before the bodybuilding, was having my daughter and then later my son. But one of the things that came true to me was in the past where I might have put myself down and been so hard on myself, I started thinking to myself, gosh, I would never want my daughter or son to do that. I wouldn't want them to how would I want them to be? And that was a game changer. So I was like, wait a second. I wouldn't want them to be that hard on themselves. So then what can I do to not be hard on myself? And so when we talk about insecurities, it's really important for us to realize we all have insecurities. Everybody has insecurities. I don't care who you are. You can look at the most successful people in the world. whether it's in sports, whether it's in business, doesn't matter the profession or the industry. Everybody has insecurities. The difference is some of us are able to become aware of them and work at them, and others don't. And it's not because you don't want to, but often because you might not know where to start. For me, I read all these self-development books, but self-development is more about motivation. It's not so much about internal inspiration. What I mean by that is motivation is fleeting. We can read something that's inspiring read something and be motivating, and that can help us for a short period of time. It's a proverbial New Year's resolution. Everybody gets motivated in January, so they start to make all of these changes. But if you never change the internal blockage that put you in a position of which you thought you needed to make the change, then you find yourself yo-yoing, flipping back. And so first thing I would say is I want you to start to become more aware of the insecurities that arise. What are they? I have a technique called labeling. In other words, when you start to feel a certain way, the best thing to do, feel that emotion. Don't repress it. Don't suppress it. Don't push it down. Because while it might be uncomfortable, it's almost like, and I always give this example to my clients where it's like, there is that old cliche that happens to a lot of kids where they think there's a monster in their closet or a monster under their bed. And then the parent comes in the room, turns on a light, look in a closet, and there's nothing there, right? Now, not to say that there's nothing there behind your insecurities, because generally there always is, whether it's a macro big trauma or it's something micro, something over time. Maybe it was something someone said once and then you started to believe it and that led to other actions, whatever it might be. But there's a story behind your insecurities. And the only way to uncover that story is much like a detective trying to uncover the truth of any case. You've got to write down the suspects. You got to write down the scenes. You got to write down the evidence. You got to sort of trace things, draw connections, draw conclusions, come up with evidence, right? Based on that stuff, not based on how you feel. So really get to a place of objectivity. So what labeling does is helps you basically create separation from your feelings. So you can look at your feelings like a reporter should look at a case that they're studying of like, what is the truth here? What is going on? Versus approaching it from an emotional perspective of, this is scary, I don't want to deal with it, I'm just going to ignore it, or just come up with a biased opinion based on how you feel. And if you felt a certain way all your life, you may truly feel that you're not athletic or that you're fat. And I don't care if you are obese, you're not fat, right? There's a difference there. Obesity is is a state that one can be in where your body percentage is at a certain amount. But that's not who you are. It's not your identity. Speaking of identity, I work with a lot of women in particular who have the empty nest syndrome, right? They've taken care of their kids their entire life. Their life was about taking care of their kids. That gave them purpose. Then their kids go away and their kids don't need them as much. And then what are they left with? And that can really clog your mind. It can lead to all sorts of uncomfortable emotions and self-judgment. So, to help with your insecurities, the first thing you need to do is label. So how to do that? I like to use Post-it notes. So you're feeling a certain way, give that emotion a name and write it down. And you got to write it down because if you keep it in your head, it's really hard to delineate that feeling from you. And again, you are not your feelings. You are not your past. So I would have a Post-it. If I were you, I'd recommend having a Post-it note pad by you at all times. You feel a certain way, give that emotion a name. And then start to put these Post-it notes somewhere where you can see them from more of a bird's eye view. And then start to question, where did that feeling come from? How long have I been feeling that feeling? What triggers that emotion? And you start to ask these questions. And when you ask questions, you get answers. And your subconscious starts to open up. And when it comes to perfectionism is basically a symptom of insecurity. It's that fear that you have to do something the right way or else you're going to receive judgment. And the thing is, we often think, and similar to fear of failure, we often think of like, well, I don't want to lose, don't want the world to see me fail, right? But that's kind of what we tell ourselves. ultimately, if you can develop self-love, because right, love, what is love? Love is not, hey, I did something really good, I love myself. Love is just like the people who you unconditionally love in your life. They're not perfect. They're not always doing what you want them to do, but you love them, right? Just as you would give unconditional love to your parents, to your kids, to your siblings, to anybody else, your partner. Well, if you're not giving that to yourself, then things like perfectionism will exist. And perfectionism will cause you to procrastinate. Perfectionism will prevent you from overall living a fulfilled life. But here's the thing. Here's the interesting thing about perfectionism. It's just a part of you. The part of you who is a perfectionist is not who you are. It's just a part of you who's trying to protect the vulnerability of some insecurity. So if you don't put yourself out there, you can't be judged, right? That's kind of like the perfectionism's MO. Or if you do put something out there, it has to be absolutely perfect. It has to be so good so that if it is judged, what can they say? So this is where we have to really ground ourselves in grace to realize, first of all, perfection is an illusion. Nothing is actually perfect. The interesting thing about perfectionism is that a lot of us have that, and I think a lot of us will admit to that. However, if you actually look at it and you were to like question yourself, be like, okay, I'm a perfectionism, but like, do I really think that everything I should do should be perfect? I mean, if you really are honest with yourself, I think you draw the conclusion that makes no sense. That's silly. I would never tell my kid that, right? But again, that's the pressure we put on ourselves. So the other thing that's really important to understand is that part of you who is, say, a perfectionist, it's because that part of you is trying to protect an insecurity. That part of you actually wants what's best for you. It just has a limited perspective of what's best for you. So again, that perspective is either don't do it at all, and that's where really the fear of failure kicks in, or do it and make sure it's really, really good. And if it's not, you better be hard on yourself so you make it good. Otherwise, or else, right? And what we need to understand is that part is just doing his or her best to protect our insecurities, but ultimately wants what's best for you. But it's limited. And what's not limited is your capital S self, the higher self that lives within you, your psychic blueprint of who you were born to be. How do you know what that is? It can be hard if you haven't gotten in touch with that over the years, but it's there. You know, what comes natural to you? When do you feel the best? These are signals of things that are associated with your highest self. And so as you learn more and more about your highest self, you start to realize you're an imperfect human, like every one of us, and there's a roadmap there, right? Because you know that if you feel a certain way, it's not because that's who you are, it's just because something's making you feel a certain way. So what is that thing, and why are you feeling it like that? So as we wrap this up, if I could leave you with anything, I would encourage you a few things. One, know that you are not your pain. You are not your quote-unquote failures from the past. You are not the parts of you who are dominant only because they took over at a very early age to take control to protect you from being such a vulnerable child, i.e. perfectionism, right? Or people-pleasing. These are other parts that are oftentimes, there's a lot of them, right? And today I'm not necessarily looking to get into all of those, but it's just important to realize those are not you. You are not them. They are parts of you. And if you can hear the inner critic, if you can hear the perfectionism, if you can hear those internal voices that oftentimes it can be really hurtful and mean or sad and put you down, that means you can hear them, which means you are not them. That's a really important point to understand. You are the one who hears them. Therefore, the work I do with my clients through mind mapping and other techniques is to help understand how your psyche is sort of situated. Like, what are the dominant parts? What are the parts that are disowned? What are the parts that are in your shadow that you don't necessarily see, but they're with you no matter where you go, right? You ever hear that saying, wherever you go, there you are? That was something, again, very prevalent in my life. I had thought, man, if I could just move to Florida, if I could just move to California, everything would be great. But what I found and I had to work through was that you're just another place. you're going to deal with the same exact issues until you actually handle and face those things. So first thing is that separate yourself from your emotions. You have emotions because you're human. You're a messy human like me and everybody else who has ever lived. That's okay. Ground yourself in grace. And you might even find it helpful to affirm yourself. I am grounded in grace. In fact, say it with me. I am grounded in grace. Number 2 is start labeling. And when you feel a certain way, don't run from those feelings. It is the proverbial monster in the closet. Not to say, again, there's nothing there, like there's not an actual monster in the kid's closet. But what you realize is that when you actually look at what's there, it's a lot less than what you're making it to be. And until you look at what's there, it's going to continue to burden you. And so label. Give your emotions a name. Write it down. Start to create, whether it's a journal or a board or something, just like a detective would. Let's try to piece together these parts because that's going to give you the ultimate answers. And lastly, give yourself grace in that no matter what podcast you listen to, what hypnosis session you do, or anything else, and you know that thing that you're probably like, man, if I could only, make this much more per month, or if I could only lose the extra 20 pounds, whatever that thing is for you. If you find yourself saying, man, if I could only, recognize that that's an illusion. You're going to have the same insecurities there at the end unless you deal with them now. So no matter where you are and who you become, you're still going to be human and you're still going to be messy, and that's okay. What can happen so often through this process of change and development, whether it's changing our physical body or an emotional state, is that we feel though we're putting in this work and then something happens and you fall off, and we can be very hard on ourselves. So a part of grace is self-love. And it might be hard for you to find that self-love. And that's okay. It's normal. It's not easy. If it was easy, we live in a lot happier of a world. Unfortunately, that's not how it is. And by the way, we talked about the animal brain that we all have that hasn't evolved. Well, guess what? That brain, you know what it's susceptible most to? Threat, negativity. Why? Because those are survival mechanisms. Bad things, thinking about bad things, being aware of bad things or potential things from happening at one point in the timeline of human species helped keep us alive. So of course, that's a natural thing that we're going to do. So realize that, understand that. And so when things don't go your way, when maybe you don't feel as good about yourself, if you can't find it in a moment to see and express self-love for you and what you've been through and the effort you're putting forth, like even if you are not where you want to be, it's not for lack of trying. And you might say, well, I'm lazy. You're not lazy. I can guarantee you that. I can guarantee you show up and do things every day in your life and other elements of your life that wouldn't be construed as lazy. I've never met anybody who hasn't had that in their life. The issue is drawing the congruence from whatever that thing is to the thing that you're currently working on. So the best way to back into self-love is to think about, how would I speak to the people who I love most in this world? Would I put them down when they were going through a really bad time? Would I put them down if they, quote unquote, failed something or they didn't get an outcome that they desired? You wouldn't do that. So don't do it to yourself. And that's just something that's going to be a practice. It's hard. You're going to be reactionary at times. You're going to be an imperfect human. But the more you can be aware of it and the more you can reflect on it, that's where the change happens. So I hope this was helpful for you today. If it was, I would invite you to share this with somebody who you might think could benefit from it. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for future episodes like this and many more. Appreciate you. Keep doing your best. Know that even sometimes when you're doing your best, you're working so hard and things aren't happening the way you want it to, it does not mean that it's all for nothing. It just means that you're on a certain path. And it's just like, I don't know if you're a video game person. I am not. But if you can at least understand in a video game, there are levels. And at the end of each level, there is some sort of monster or some sort of thing you have to overcome in order to get to the next level. And that applies to life. It's likely that if you're working hard at something and you find yourself stuck or you're having ups and downs, it's just that you haven't beat that monster yet at the end of the level. But you will, with consistency, with help from others. You absolutely will. You have everything in you to do that. And here's the thing. Once you do, you're going to go up to that next level. And guess what? There's going to be a monster at the end of that. And unlike a video game, this game of life is one we get to play until we stop breathing. So it doesn't ever get easy. It just gets easier because with each and every level you get past, with each and every obstacle you overcome, you develop a greater resilience and you develop a greater sense of self, knowing that, hey, I did that. I did that. And you know what? Right now, before I let you go, just do that with me really quick. Think about a thing in your life that you've overcome. And maybe it was a horrible thing. Maybe you don't even love where you're at right now, but you're here listening to this. And the fact that you're listening to this means that you're looking for an answer. You're looking for help, which means you're on the path. So say that with me really quick. I did that. I did that. And if you can start acknowledging what you've overcome, then you're going to find it easier and easier and easier to overcome whatever gets put on your path in the near future.